Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for this month's Let's Learn .NET. I'll be your host today. I'm Katie Savage, and I'm filling in for the wonderful Jamie Singleton. We're so incredibly excited to have you with us here to learn about Visual Studio and how you can use Visual Studio with .NET. Today, I have two awesome experts with me to discuss how to get up and running with .NET in Visual Studio and be as productive as possible. I'm incredibly excited to get started, so I'm going to bring on my first expert, Mads, to take us away.
Hello, Katie. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Mads. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's early morning here in Redmond, and I'm ready to show off Visual Studio.
Oh, I'm ready to see everything you have for us today, but I'd love to get started with you just with a little bit of an introduction as to what you do and what you're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So, just very briefly about myself. I have I've been a programmer for basically all my adult life. I started kind of early, before I kind of knew what I wanted to do in the world as a student, and I never really took a full college degree, computer science. I'm a little bit self-taught. But managed to work in startups up through my 20s, and I got hired by Microsoft, and I've been working on Visual Studio for quite a few years now. And so I have this deep love of programming and development and writing code, and I now get to do it very, very on a daily basis, very often, right? And I do it with Visual Studio, which is it's just the program that makes me feel most at home. And I hope that I can share some of that reasoning why it is that I just love Visual Studio so much with the audience here today. And so I'm very excited. I don't get to show this off that often, so yeah, super excited.
Yeah, I'm hanging on to every word, Mads. I'm super excited to hear and learn from all of your knowledge today.
No pressure. Okay,
No pressure at all.
right. So here's what I was thinking we would do. We would go over well, how do you get Visual Studio? And there's some different versions of Visual Studio. So which one is the right one for you? Then we want to personalize Visual Studio, and what I mean by that is to make it feel like home. So the thing is, when we write code, we spend a lot of time sitting in our editor of choice. In this case, it would be Visual Studio. And so we want to make sure that it feels as much as home as possible. It's the same thing. Like if you move into a house, you want to make sure that you have the right color rug and curtains and furniture and all this sort of stuff to make it yours, right? It's the same thing with Visual Studio. Then we're going to look at understanding what are projects and what are solutions. And that's going to come really in handy when we're working with .NET and C# and so on. And then you probably heard of Git and GitHub, and we're going to take a look at how Visual Studio can help us super easily you do open source on GitHub or utilize Git source control features. And then finally, we're going to have Mika in here to show all about editing and exploring code, which is a whole chapter in and by itself. And that's where we're going to spend most of our time as developers, like actually writing the code. So I hope that I can come in here in the beginning and show you sort of around Visual Studio what it is, what it does, and we'll take it from there.
Amazing.
So let's look at my screen here, because something happened this year. And that is, there we go. And that is that Visual Studio turned 25 years old. So it's kind of an old application, right? When you think about it, but it's really a testament to just how popular it's been over the years and how powerful it is. It really empowers developers to write cool apps. And what we say on the Visual Studio team is that we are not successful unless our users are successful. And so that's why 25 years later, Visual Studio is stronger than ever. We have more people using Visual Studio today than we ever had before. And so 25 years, it's a big milestone. Yeah, someone here is commenting here that Visual Studio is actually older than .NET, which is true. Yeah. It's like four or 5 years older. So this is the visualstudio.com. That's a great place to get started. If you want to download Visual Studio, go to visualstudio.com. You're going to see this kind of 25-year anniversary edition of the website right now. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see that here's the Visual Studio family. There's 3 products. There's Visual Studio, which we're going to talk about today. Then there's Visual Studio for the Mac. And finally, there's Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio runs on Windows, and Visual Studio for Mac, of course, runs on a Mac. And Visual Studio Code runs on pretty much all operating systems. But there are key differences here. So Visual Studio, the first one on Windows, is the one that's 25 years old. That's the thing that started everything. That's the one that has all the full features. It really is the big powerhouse that's going to get you off to a great start doing .NET. Visual Studio for Mac also, it's a much newer product, but it also have a lot of rich features for .NET, and it's relevant for you if you are on a Mac. And then finally, Visual Studio Code. It's a little bit different because it's not what we call an integrated development environment. It's closer to like a code editor. So it's more than just Notepad, like a simple text editor. It has more features than that. But it is more bare bone. It kind of encourages you to set up your own different components, installing the ones you want, using different command line tools and stuff like that. It's not all in the box. Whereas the two other Visual Studios kind of have everything you need in the box so that you can like just start being productive right away. There's nothing. It's not like one is better than the other. It's just two different ways of looking at development and coding. So you can choose which edition of Visual Studio you want. Do you want Community, Professional, or Enterprise? And it has to do with what license you have. Community is free. You can just install that right away. It will never cost you $1. It's just free. Professional costs some money, and Enterprise costs even more. But usually, the Enterprise is for basically big companies that buy a lot of licenses for all their engineers and software developers. Professional is for the professional developers that want a little bit more features than what's in Community, but they're actually pretty close. So you almost get the exact same thing between Community and Professional. What you get on the Professional is some services that come in addition to Visual Studio itself. So once you download Visual Studio, you're actually downloading the Visual Studio installer. Where is it? Which I already have because I have Visual Studio installed, but you're going to see something like this. This is the Visual Studio installer. It's a small little download. And this program is a standalone program that allows you to install Visual Studio. And you can see I have two different installations of Visual Studio. I have version 2019 and version 2022. 2022 is the newest one that was released not long ago. So I can have multiple versions installed at the same time. They don't conflict with each other. It's kind of nice. What you're going to see when you have launched this for the very first time is what's being shown here when I click the Modify button. This is where we select what do we want to install? What is the type of development that we're doing? And for me, I like to do ASP.NET and web development. So this is kind of web development with .NET. I also have a check mark here in .NET desktop development. So this is if I want to do like Windows apps and console applications and so on with .NET. But you can see here, I have a wide array of things to choose from: Azure development, Node.js, Python, mobile apps, C++, and so on. Gaming with Unity, gaming with C++, data science, data storage, Office development, extension development. You see, I have a check mark here because I love writing extensions for Visual Studio, but that's a topic for another day. And finally, you can do Linux and embedded software as well. So you can really do a lot of things. And these are buckets. These different things, we call them workloads. And basically what they are a collection of components that are installed with Visual Studio. And we can go see the individual components in the installer. And you see this list is very long. And so it's much easier to reason about if we just select the buckets that are already prepared for us. So if you want to do .NET, I suggest you do ASP.NET and web development, .NET desktop as well. And if you want to do mobile apps like iOS and Android development with .NET as well, make sure to get that one. And then you just click the install button, and depending on how much you have selected to install, it'll take a little longer, it'll take a little shorter, but anything from like a couple of minutes maybe to 10, 15 minutes total. And you can also see here, I actually have an update available. So the installer is handy. You can always update Visual Studio from here. There's updates on a monthly basis. So you're always kind of getting the latest and greatest. Katie, should we do questions as I go along, or are we keeping that at the end?
I'm thinking that for now we should do a couple of questions that have filtered in just before we dive into making your Visual Studio environment nice and homey. So the first one is, what's the major difference between VS for Windows and VS for Mac?
Oh, that's a good question. So um, they came from two separate places in origin. So Visual Studio for Mac was actually a different program um, that was open source and was bought by Microsoft and brought in and got a lot of components moved from Visual Studio into Visual Studio for Mac over time. The idea is to align the two so they're exactly the same. But of course, that takes time. And so there are some things that you can do better on the Visual Studio for Mac, of course, stuff like iOS development and so on, and stuff that are better on Visual Studio for Windows. So one thing is that for instance, you cannot build Windows apps on Visual Studio for Mac using the old .NET, only the new .NET, what's called .NET Core, or actually it's just called .NET 5 now, or .NET 6. So so there are some differences. I don't know, John, if you want to jump in. And John, the producer here, he used to work on Visual Studio for Mac, so he's got some inside baseball knowledge here.
Yeah, I think you did a great job there. I mean, so yeah, originally came from Xamarin Studio and mostly focused on building on mobile applications, and kind of the really main core scenarios that we see people building Visual Studio for Mac with. So you've got mobile, you've got .NET Core, so that includes all the ASP.NET Core, microservices, etc. Also, we do see some people building Unity applications because it can integrate pretty well there. And currently, right now, there's some exciting things going on with Visual Studio 22 for Mac. And they're actually rebuilding a lot of the UI portion of it so that it works. It's a lot more integrated with Cocoa and Mac OS. As you said, Mads, it came from a product that actually was cross-platform. It worked on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And part of the way that they made that work had a lot of like abstractions that kind of got in the way of this pure native experience. So that's been a year-long process they've been working on. They're getting really close to the full release of this kind of rewrite. And one nice thing with that is once that's done, they can pull in they can share a lot more of the code with Visual Studio for Windows. So that's my quick spiel on that.
That's amazing. I didn't know all the history behind that. I feel like I learn new things every day, even when I'm not expecting to. That's super great.
It's all fascinating, including like, and it came up earlier in the chat, but like Visual Studio for Windows has been out for decades, and there's just like, there's so much, so many features and so many things in there. So, yep. I will go ahead and disappear again, but great question.
Thank you, John.
Our behind the scenes guy.
So I just want to tell the audience here that I look down sometimes this way. It's because I have the questions I have listed. Sort of, I have a tablet down here where I can see the questions. So it's not that I don't want to look at the camera. It's just I can't see the questions if I do. So.
Same for me. I'm pivoting back and forth, but I'm fully focused on you all. And we have another question I wanted to address here. So is enterprise still required for live code testing feedback?
Yes. So the live unit testing is still a feature that is only in the top enterprise SKU. It's not in professional or in the free community edition. Yeah, that is still the case. Often we see features that are being introduced in enterprise that over time they will go down and also be featured in the professional and in the community edition. But live unit testing is still only in the enterprise. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. And then one more here before we continue on with your amazing knowledge. So is it required to learn JavaScript before .NET? What do you think?
Well, that depends on what you want to do. So I would just say if the question is just like, if you're new to programming and like, should I choose one first before I do the other? No. If all you want to do is get started with programming, there's no right or wrong language to start with. If you want to write web, if you want to be a web developer and you want to use .NET, you don't have to know JavaScript to produce a website that people can browse and enjoy. JavaScript adds kind of a layer on top of web that makes things more interactive, but it is not a fundamental building block of the web in the same way. It is a fundamental building block, don't get me wrong, but it's not a required component to build a website. Like that would just be HTML. So if I were to say anything, if you were to write, if you were to be a web developer, I would make sure you understand HTML really well. And you can do that the same time you do .NET, because the way ASP.NET works is that it has you doing both at the same time. And you can then sprinkle in JavaScript later on. And if you want to dive into these big JavaScript frameworks like React and Angular and Vue.js and what have we, like that's a whole different path. Like if you want to go that way, you might not have to deal with .NET in the beginning, but it is some. But that's a big kind of isolated path to go down. So yeah, it depends on what kind of development you want to do. But for instance, for me, I learned everything at the same time. That's probably what's going to happen for you as well. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript together with C#, .NET, and those sort of things, and Visual Studio. It's all at the same time, because to produce something that's a full app or whatever, you kind of need all those things.
Yeah, a more holistic experience, definitely. Well, thank you so much. I'll get out of your way so that we can continue on.
Okay. So now that we've installed Visual Studio, it's going to look a little bit like this when it opens up. So I already loaded a solution in here. You can see in Solution Explorer. Those are my files. They're right here. But let's take a look at what Visual Studio has to offer, because when we come in and see this for the very first time, it might be hard to understand where to even begin. So let's just do a very brief tour, and then we're going to start like kind of making some changes that makes us happier as developers. So let's start up here. We have the top level menu is what this is called. File, edit. We know this from other programs, right? It's from here we can create new things, open existing solutions and files, so on and so forth. Edit all has to do with the editor. So when we're editing code. View is a bunch of tool windows. So a tool window is this like Solution Explorer here. This is a tool window. Here's another one. Right? There's some hiding down here. These are tool windows, and there's a bunch of them here, and there's even other windows that has even more. So you see there's a lot of stuff going on, and we don't have to know all of these at all, as you will see here in a moment. But it's nice to know where they are in case we need to find them. We can work with Git, source control. We have some stuff about the project that's currently being worked on. Building and debugging, of course, are important. And unit testing. So we're not really going to talk about tests today, but Visual Studio has a full testing capabilities built in for .NET using various different test frameworks. So you can choose which one you want, or just the regular one that comes with. I guess there's a couple to choose from, but they're all like very similar. We can analyze our code. We have various different tools, extensions, so we can add new functionality to Visual Studio. And window, and of course help, which is a nice place to go to learn about things. If we get stuck with something, the help menu is helpful. Funny enough. So that menu up here is nice to kind of know about. It has most of the things we care for. And right underneath it, we have our toolbar. And I can right-click the toolbar. This is the standard toolbar. And I can add another one. So let's get the formatting one. And I can just keep adding if I want even more. Just keep adding like this. And it just adds them to the list here. And if I don't want them, I can remove them again. I'm kind of a minimalist. I like to just have what I need and nothing else. So that's a toolbar. As I said, these are tool windows. And down here at the bottom, let's see if I can zoom in. Down here at the bottom, in what's called the status bar, I have my Git source control. It tells me like what my Git repo is, what branch I'm on, if I have any incoming or outgoing commits, and that sort of stuff, how many edits I have. So it tells me about my source control. And this bell down here, if I click it, it shows me notifications. And this one says, hey, there's an update to Visual Studio. Now I'm using an internal nightly build of Visual Studio. So I actually have an update notification every day because there's a new build every day. But this is where, when there's an update for your Visual Studio, it will show up here. So you can always tell when there is something to be updated. So you can do that if you choose, or ignore it if you don't. If you're busy doing something else, that's fine too. And you just close it by clicking the button up there. So that is sort of the what we call the Chrome of Visual Studio, the things that are not about editing our code. If I open a file, then in here, that is where we want to edit our code, is in the code window here. So that shows up here. We have they're tabs, right? So it's tab documents. I can go back and forth. We all know about this. But that is in essence sort of Visual Studio as we are gonna explore our code here and start writing code. But let's make this our own, because you might have used another editor before, another IDE, and you feel like you don't want your files to be on the right side. So you want that to be on the left side. So you can take any tool window, you can just take it and you can move it. And you see these docking points coming up? If you put your mouse on that, it docks it right there. See? You can even say, hey, I want my files on one side, and then here's another window. I can tear that off here. So I want that one on this side over here. Boom. All right. And then down here, I have an output window. I'm going to dock that here. So now you can see you can kind of fill up your screen. If you have a larger screen, this makes sense. And there are all these different ways you can set it up so it matches your screen. Even if you have multiple monitors, you can tear off a thing like this and put on a separate monitor. So you can have Visual Studio fill up multiple monitors, which can be super handy, right? And if I want this one to go back on top of Solution Explorer, I'm going to do it like this. Let go. And boom, now it's there. You see the order is wrong, though. I want my Git changes window to be on the right-hand side. So I'm going to take it and drag it. And there it is. So you can completely customize where you want all these things. And you see here, you can pin things so they stay up, or you can collapse them down like this and they stay down here. And when you now have your layout the way you want, you can even save it. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to Window, Save Window Layout. Let's call this one for left, okay? Because we dock our solution to the left here, Solution Explorer, and hit OK. So now if I go into, say, Apply Window Layout, see, I already have a few here. I got one that I use for extension development. Let's click that one. Boom. See, now it's different. It has a completely different window docked down here. This comes from an extension, so it's not even in the box. So whether you have extensions, it doesn't matter. They all follow the same UI pattern. And I can use shortcut keys, right? So they're all Control-Alt and then a number. So my default is Control-Alt-1. That's my default. It kind of hides everything but Solution Explorer. And Control-Alt-4 is the one we just made. And boom, it snaps back. So if you're on a laptop that you use at home just with one screen, you might have one keyboard layout or one window layout. And then when you come to the office or somewhere else where you plug it into multiple monitors, you can do like a quick shortcut key and boom, all the windows maximize your workspace for that situation you're in. So, but I like to go back to what I call my default, which is right here. Kind of a minimalist. It goes back to like why I want the minimalist toolbars as well. And speaking of minimalist toolbars, I've actually optimized this for my workflow. So if I click on any toolbar, I can, like on the right-hand side, I can add and remove buttons. So Visual Studio has a bunch of commands that are like default to some of these toolbars. So this is the standard toolbar, and I have all these things to choose from. I've already unselected a whole lot of them, and I've added some new ones. So this is what that looks like. You can, like, if I say I want that one and that one, see how they were added over here? I can remove them again. So save and save all. Those are there by default, actually, and I kind of didn't need them because I know to hit Control-S to save a document. I know most of these keyboard shortcuts. You learn that over time, so you can optimize this as you get more familiar with Visual Studio. But you can actually go even farther, and you can click Customize. And when you do that, we can customize the toolbar here. Here's the toolbar. Here are all the things that we selected, and you can now add a command. And this is crazy. It gives you all the commands, like thousands of commands probably, that you can now move into Visual Studio, in this case, the standard toolbar. So I can take any one of these and move with me to wherever I want it to be. But I can do the same with menus. So which menu do you want? The top level file menu, or some of its submenus, and so on. And so you can customize this completely to your liking. You can even remove stuff that you feel like you're never going to need, or if it's too noisy, you can even do that. So you got full customizable options here. Here's a very popular way of customizing Visual Studio. Go to Tools, Themes, and let's select the theme. I got a bunch of themes installed here, so I'm going to do dark theme. We're now using the blue theme that's built into VS, so it's the dark theme that I'm selecting here. So that applies right here. And that's kind of neat, right? So this is, a lot of people prefer the dark theme. So, and it is beautiful. I love the dark theme. But you can install more extensions. So I've installed a bunch. So let's see here. Which one is a good one? I think I like what about the solarized light? Just completely different look and feel, right? So you know this from other editors. There's nothing like unique about this for Visual Studio. It's just nice to know that you can do this. And if you go to extensions and manage extensions, we can click on Visual Studio, Tools, and go to Themes. And you can see all the themes that are available right here for you to download and install. And some of these are theme packs. So for instance, this one here is so you have all these GitHub ones. So this one has, I think it's one extension, one theme pack that has 6 different themes. And they kind of all look similar but different. But when you're on a screen sharing like I am, I kind of like the blue one because it's the one that most people are comfortable with watching on a live stream. So whether it's my personal or not doesn't actually matter. It's much more visible. So I'm going to choose this just for this live stream for you guys. Okay. So those were themes. And if we go to the marketplace, marketplace.visualstudio.com. Actually, if I go to Tools, Themes, I can say Get More Themes. And it will even open here and search for theme. And I can select from a bunch of theme packs here, right? And I can even see what they look like. So let's see. There's I did a few of these, I think. Here's one. So here's where you can see what it looks like. So that's kind of nice to browse around here on the marketplace. And we're going to get back to the marketplace here in a second. One cool thing you can do, if you go to Tools Options and you go to Environment, you can select color theme here. You can also select the color theme. Here we go, right? Let's see here. Where did that go? Here, use system settings. This one. Actually, that one was also over here. Use system settings. So if I choose that one, it will now follow my Windows settings. So if I'm in dark mode on Windows, or it will choose the dark theme. And if I'm on light mode on Windows, it will choose the blue theme, the one I'm currently on here. And you can set Windows up to automatically follow sunset, sunrise. And that means Visual Studio would follow along as well. So that's kind of super neat, actually. And as we want to, personalize even further, we want to install extensions. And let's just go and look at the extension manager here. Manage extensions is called. And look under install extensions. Check this out. These are all my extensions. These are not some I installed because I was going to give this presentation. I did not install a single one because of this presentation. These are just, I like to have a lot of extensions because they make my workflow better. So I installed the extensions that are relevant to me and to what I do. I like to build websites. I like to build extensions for Visual Studio. And so the types of extensions I have is some that help me with that and make me more productive. And it's super cool. Like if you click on the online tab, you get access to, there's thousands of extensions. And you can search, you can find the ones you care about and just install them right there, right? So very, very convenient. And this is the same data that comes from the marketplace that we just looked at. Here you go, marketplace.visualstudio.com, collection of them all, basically. So I highly encourage you to go check out. This is where we can really customize Visual Studio and make ourselves super productive, because we can install features that are relevant to our very unique scenarios. The thing about Visual Studio users is that there's not like one or sorry, there's not like just like 5 types of Visual Studio users. Everyone is unique. Everyone has a unique mix of things they work on or things they prefer. And so it's very cool that you have these extensions to really hone that experience that you need to be as productive as you can. Okay. So
I'd love to hop in and ask you a couple of questions, actually, before we move on to our next thing. I'm just seeing them pile up, and I really want to ask. The first one is, will VS Code have powerful and deep IntelliSense for .NET, similar to VS IntelliSense?
That's a great question. So it's true here. There's also something, there's an extension like OmniSharp, but their capabilities are well below what VS can offer. So OmniSharp is evolving over time. OmniSharp is an extension for Visual Studio Code that gives C# abilities, a great editing abilities for C# in particular. And it's probably always going to be a little behind what's in Visual Studio. Visual Studio is where we put the features first for .NET. So it is Visual Studio is really the premier place to do any .NET development. But we try to make sure that Visual Studio Code also works. For instance, Visual Studio Code is the only of our development editors that work on Linux, for instance. So we want people that sit on a Linux machine to also be able to write .NET, right? And so they need a great experience. But we don't have infinite amount of resources, and we have to prioritize certain things. So we prioritize Visual Studio, and then OmniSharp is still being worked out at the same time, and will also get these features. So I hope that answers the question. Visual Studio will always be ahead, but OmniSharp will get better. And so we can look at it like this: they both go up, they both get better like this, but they will always have a distance between them. This being VS has higher capabilities, but does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And on that kind of VS Code line of thought, Tom has a question. He wants to import his keystroke settings from VS to VS Code. How can he do that?
Yeah, that's a thing. So if you go to Tools Options, let me show search here. I can search keyboard. And so I can change hotkeys and keyboard shortcuts. Let's click that one. So check this out. I can get the Visual Studio Code key bindings for Visual Studio, or ReSharper, or Visual Basic, or whatever other type I have here. And I think there are some extensions that add even more. Like there's an extension out there that adds IntelliJ and other like known IDEs. So if you're familiar with other IDEs, keyboard shortcuts, you can import them or just apply them if they're already here built into Visual Studio. And if you're in VS Code, I do believe that they have a way to adopt the VS ones, or maybe it's an extension you download. Actually, maybe that's what it is, but it's possible. I know that it's possible.
Definitely. That's super helpful and nice to know.
Yep.
Another question we have here is, how do you remove the search bar in the title bar?
Yeah, so the search bar up here. So right now there's no way to remove it, but in the next preview version that's coming out, you'll see that changes and is way smaller, and it's going to change quite significantly. So I don't think there'll be that much of a need to remove it anymore. But yeah, there's no way to remove it currently.
Okay, good to know. 2 or 3 more here, just going through them rapid fire. But is there an easy way to preserve font settings when switching themes? It seems that when you switch themes, this user has to redo all of their font settings.
There is not. That is unfortunate, because that is determined by the theme. So that's kind of the nature of the game. I think there is, if you go to developercommunity.visualstudio.com, or actually if you go to help and say explore feature requests, let's click it. That gets you to where people report bugs and ask for feature requests. And I think if you search in here and you find there's already one feature request, so find that here and then vote for it, so that it gets higher up in our priority list. And if it doesn't exist, create a feature request for it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. One more question here. I heard GitHub Copilot is for VS now as well. Can you confirm?
It's in private preview. I actually have it installed. I actually have it here. I was lucky enough to get in on that private preview early on, so I actually do have it.
Let me jump in a second. They just announced it's available. I just shared the link for it here. So
like
there.
Can you give details like public preview?
Yep, public preview.
Nice.
So it just came out on on the 29th, 2 days ago.
So here's how to get it. Go to extension, manage extensions, and then you simply search for Copilot. And there it is. You see I have it installed. So go install this, and this one will prompt you to go to authenticate against GitHub to make sure you're signed up for the preview, which that was true when it was private. So maybe you don't even have to do that anymore. But yeah, it's here.
Wow, very new updates here on Let's Learn. I love it.
Yeah.
And the last question I have for you, Mads, before we continue on is, Farouk is saying, I find key shortcuts mapping a little annoying in VS. He always struggles with setting Control+/ for line comment toggle. Do you have any tips or tricks for him?
No, unfortunately, that's kind of the nature of the beast. The thing about Visual Studio, it has so many commands, and a lot of them have key bindings. So some of them are already taken. So whenever there's whenever there's another editor out there that has a keyboard shortcut that we really like, for instance, Control / to toggle line comments, that might already be taken in Visual Studio because, as I said, Visual Studio is 25 years old, so it's older than most other IDEs. But we can do something. So it's Control Alt for that feature. I believe it's Control Alt. So we can search for it here. So toggle comment. So I can just search for toggle comments or toggle breakpoint. So you can find your command up here. Which one is it? Toggle out, toggle case, toggle line comment. There it is. You see here, Control K, Control / That's what it is. So I can say, I want it to be Control / like this. And then I can assign it. Boom, done.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering. That's all the questions for now. So we can continue on, and I'm sure I'll pop back soon for more questioning.
Okay, good. So let's close this solution that I have open here. So we didn't even look at this code because it's not really relevant. I just wanted to show you what the files look like in the Solution Explorer tool window. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that. Go into File, Close Solution. Now let's create a new one. So I'm going to go File, New, and I can choose from various different things. New project, new empty repository, new file, or new project from existing code, right? I just want to create a new project. Now check this out. We get what we call the new project dialog showing up. See, I've been working with extensions. So extensions is the one that's selected here for me. But these are templates. These are starting points. So let's say, something .NET. So I might go into here and say, filter on C#. So now the list got shorter, and there's a lot of .NET here, right? There's so many things. It's really cool. So I want .NET, and do I want it for Android, iOS, Linux? Look at all this kind of stuff. Even tvOS and Xbox. You can really do some cool things here with Visual Studio. But I'm actually just going to do the console application. That's kind of a nice getting started example that's always used in classrooms and whatnot. And we can give it a name. I'm just going to call it console app 4. It puts it on disk right here under my user profile. And actually, let's call it, learn.net, right? Let's click next. And which version of .NET do I want? And I just want the default here is usually the one I would like. So I'm just going to click create. So .NET version 6. And it will now scaffold out the whole project for me. And it's pretty basic. There's just one CS file right here. And then I have dependencies. And let's see here, they're probably being restored right now. So if you work with the Node.js, you might be aware of NPM, the Node Package Manager. It's a way to install packages. So you install code from other developers so that you don't have to write everything from scratch, but you can pull in components. And of course, .NET has the same thing. So that's something we can see on our dependency, or what are our dependencies of packages and frameworks and so on. But notice here we have a project, and then we have a solution. So solution can have multiple projects. A project is a collection of, in our case, C# files that I can compile and build, and it could be an exe file, an executable file, like a console app, for instance. It can also be a website. It can be a unit test project, a desktop app, and they can all exist in the same solution. So I might want to build an app that has a web front end and a phone app at the same time, and they all talk to the same database layer through some shared code. So that might be like 2, 3, 4, 5 different projects that I have in my solution. So it's a way of organizing my code into different projects in single solutions. And it's kind of handy to do it that way. But Visual Studio can also, if you more like to just have the flat list of files, Visual Studio can do that as well. So we can click this button, which shows different views available. We have only one solution. You can have multiple solutions in a repo. So in this case, we only have one. And I can click the folder view. And now you see this is simply just the what's on disk, the folders. But I much prefer the solution view right here. So once we have our app, we can set a breakpoint like this. And we can click the play button. That means launch. Let's open this up. You can see here, I have some options here, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But I can just click the big green play button to run. And notice here, I'm setting the breakpoint. And you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to run this. It's going to build my code. And then it's going to run when it's done. And it runs my console app here, right? So the console opens up. And because I set a breakpoint, the debugger kicks in and stops right here, and I can now inspect the code that I have. So this code doesn't actually do anything at all, right? It just console write line, it just writes. So I can just step over here, F10, or click the button up here. See the toolbars came up. So there's a contextual toolbar here that showed up automatically. It knew I'm debugging, so it gives me my debug toolbar. So I can step over that. And we can now see we wrote hello world up here, right? So what's really cool about this experience is that I can open a new project, hit the play button, or F5 is the sort of the way to play or run your app. And I can set breakpoints and step through my code line by line as it's being executed. And you get all that out of the box just by the initial install of Visual Studio. It's all here. I don't have to install different compilers or settings and put together my own environment like a lot of other editors. You have to do that. No, it's all here, and that makes Visual Studio super powerful for kind of getting started and getting your first line of code written, and see if it works. Hit the play button, see that it runs, and then once we've done that, we might want to share our code. So the way we can do that is that we want to use source control. So what I can do is that I can either, right-click my solution, and there's a bunch of options in here. Right-click the project, there's a bunch of options in here. I can go to the Git window up here, and there's something called Create Git Repository. Create Git Repository on the solution here as well. Or down here it says Add to Source Control, okay? And I only have one source control provider installed. I can install more from extensions, like if I want to use other things than Git, like Subversion or CSV or whatever it might be. So I kind of like to just right click. That to me, that's natural. So I right click the solution and say Create Git Repository. So I get a window, and it allows me to, it will automatically give me a git ignore template. That's nice. I don't have to think about that. Oh, what license do I want? Good question. I always want a license. Do I want other people to be able to use my code? Then I might choose an Apache or an MIT license, right? So let's do MIT. That seems to be so popular. Do I want a README file? Yes, sure. I forgot about that too. Oh, that's so nice. And I already signed in to Visual Studio with my GitHub. Otherwise, it would ask me to sign in to GitHub with Visual Studio. So I can select, well, which one of my organizations do I want to publish this to? What should I call the repository? Should it be private or public? So this is if I want to share it with the world, right? This is how I get up to Visual Studio. Oh, sorry, not Visual Studio, up to GitHub. But, if I have other providers, I can do an existing remote. In that case, what's the URL? What's the Git URL if I use, other providers than GitHub? Or if I just want a local Git repository, I can do that. But I really like to put things on GitHub. So I'm going to just say create and push. And it just takes place in the background. And see here, Visual Studio pops up saying that it's creating in the background. I can keep working on my project. So that's kind of neat. And if I go look at, so github.com/Matt Christensen, and we call learn.net. Boom, here it is. It gave me a README file. It put the git ignore files in here. It added a license, so license.txt, right? So all those things I did not have to do myself. Visual Studio helped me with it. It's really, really easy for me to get started. Let's see here. I got some other projects in here. So let's clone a repository. Let's find one here. Let's do, actually, I'm gonna take this one, mini block. So I'm just gonna copy the whole URL up here. Copy the URL, and then in Visual Studio, I'm gonna just close this solution. I can say clone repository, file, and then clone repository. I give it the URL and say here, where do you want to put this? I want to put it right here. I can, select, or I can also just browse GitHub, right? So I can actually just find what's already, I didn't even have to copy, since it was one of my repos, I get them all right here. I can see them all right here. But let's say it was someone else's repo. That won't show up here. So I can just paste in the URL and hit the clone button. And here we go. It just moves it all in like this. And it's, so hey, there's a solution. It's a website. It shows it up. This is an old website of mine that I built. And I can now work on that. And let's open README file here. So I have an extension here that shows Markdown. And let's make a change here. I'm just going to write here. I'm going to remove some white space at the bottom and save that. And you can now see over here, Visual Studio says that, hey, this has been changed, right? This icon here means that the file has been changed. If I go to the Git Changes window, we can see that I have some, what is this? So, okay, that was some old stuff. So we can remove these. I'm just going to delete those. There we go. Delete. That didn't work. Okay, we're just going to commit this. Actually, I want to see what that is. I wasn't able to delete those. Let's open git ignore. This is so old. So .vs into the ignore file. There we go. So now I have changed the git ignore file too. But you see those other things disappeared because I'm now ignoring that. So I can just make a change. Okay, what do I say? I say updated git ignore and readme, like that, right? And I can say commit all and push, or just commit. If I just commit it, it commits it locally. Like do that. If I do that, it's only on my machine. I haven't pushed anything up. So I could have said commit and push. That means push it up to GitHub. But I can also just click the push button like this. And so now I'm making a change, made a change locally, committed it to Git, and pushed it up to GitHub for everyone else to see. So this was live. I live changed the README and the git ignore file here and pushed that up to GitHub. And I didn't have to type anything in like in a console or anything like that. Visual Studio has super nice UI that I can look at. And if I want to dive deeper into all the Git stuff, there's rich opportunity to do that. There's a bunch of features that are awesome for working with Git once you get a little bit more familiar with that. But that's, again, a topic for another day. That's a whole session on its own. So with that, I think the initial introduction to Visual Studio here is over. Do we have any questions, Katie?
We do have a few. And also, thanks for bringing it full circle. Our last theme was actually GitHub. So now it's kind of coming together here.
Nice.
Our first question is, will UI Designer be available for MAUI app development?
Maybe John knows. I do believe so. John, do you know?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I would assume it would. Yeah. I have a hard time believing it wouldn't.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Next question. Is Team Foundation Server no longer supported by VS?
No, it is still supported by VS. Yep, it's still there. The old Team Explorer is still there. We can find a view. Team Explorer is here. So and the new Git tooling. So if you use Git with Azure DevOps, there's a bunch of new tooling in there as well. So old TFS is still supported, and Azure DevOps is supported and actually getting more and more support. Yep.
Okay, perfect. And do the git ignore files get saved in a list depository?
The git ignore is just a file that it goes on disk. So if I open folder in File Explorer here, you can see git ignore is just a file that exists here. This is my this is that mini block repository from GitHub that we just cloned and opened. So it has GitHub right there. Or sorry, git ignore right there. Yeah.
And I think the question too that they're asking, and I'm mentioning this because I always have to think it through, but that file normally is committed to the repo.
Yeah.
If you go and look on GitHub, you'll see those git ignore files are actually in the repo as well.
Right here. Yeah. It has to be in the repo, for them to take effect.
Yeah.
But that's a way that you can ignore certain files or folders to be part of your repo. So if you have, build artifacts like the exe file that you produce when you build the product, you compile your project, like that is not part of the source code. That's the output, and usually you don't want to put that up on GitHub, right? People can compile themselves. You just want the source code up there.
Okay.
There was one more question that just came in. I think you had shown this in there, but just to make it clear, maybe. Mm-hmm. About making a pull request, so this is different. The actual pull request is different. I misread this.
So once I commit and push something, Visual Studio asks, hey, do you want to create a pull request? So if I click that, I go in and I get the GitHub, in this case, the GitHub interface for creating pull requests. It is something we're working on to get that experience into Visual Studio as well, but as of right now, it's not in. If that's something you want us to prioritize, definitely go to help and then go to explore feature requests or suggest a feature. It's already there. It's already being tracked, but we want your vote for handling pull requests in Visual Studio. That helps us figure out what to do next, right? Because we have a lot of features we want to add. And so the more votes in these features have, it makes it easier for us to prioritize which one to do first. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And I have my own question, actually. You've talked about so much amazing content and topics. If I wanted to find out more or kind of review what you've gone over, where should I head to for that?
So visualstudio.com is always a really good place to start. And there's links to pretty much everything you need. And, you have support up here. You have the different things you can do in Visual Studio, documentation, all sorts of things is right in here. I think we have a link to how to install Visual Studio. So if you need help, I kind of went through this, but I forgot to show this website. But this website is basically how you download and install. You see, you select the workloads, all the stuff, or individual components, right? So this is kind of the documentation I went through, but I forgot to show the website. But I think we linked to it, don't we, Katie?
Yes, we do. I just wanted to make sure that people knew where to go, besides this recording, of course, when it comes out.
No, visualstudio.com is your friend. That is the place to start.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Mads. I've learned so much. I've been taking notes of all the timestamps so that I can come back and look at them later on.
Nice.
I just want, because Mads is going to be too nice or whatever, but can you go to live.net in your browser? And so that top one on the right there, Hacking Visual Studio, is Mads's show. This is a regular show, and he goes through like all. If you want to learn more about Visual Studio, I highly recommend this show. It's just about every week, and Mads shows how to write extensions. I learn stuff every single time, so just very much recommended for continuing to learn more cool. If you enjoyed the past hour, definitely watch that show.
Well, thank you, John. Yeah, that's for how do we get the most out of Visual Studio by hacking it, right? How do we write extensions and stuff that gets us the features that we need to optimize for our workflow the best and stuff. So yeah, so that might be the geekiest show that we have for Visual Studio.
I love it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. We have our other expert on deck, Mika, to talk about .NET productivity.
Hey, how's it going?
How are you doing?
I'm good. That was awesome. I learned so much from Matt's presentation. I was like taking notes.
I was like on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Mika, before we get into it, can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us what you're going to teach us today?
Yeah, so my name is Mika Dumont, and I'm a program manager on the .NET and Visual Studio team. And I specifically work on Roslyn, which is the C# and the Visual Basic compiler. So it brings you all of the cool editing tooling experiences like IntelliSense, quick info, code fixes and refactorings, code style preferences, and analyzers, and much more. And today I'm going to go over the tooling in Visual Studio that my team works on when editing and exploring code. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about the debugger as well.
Ooh, I'm very excited. I'll let you get into it so that I can continue my note-taking on the side.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. All right. So today I thought it would be cool to walk through writing a simple program that reads a file. So I know Mads already, spoke about how to create a new project. So I'm gonna just quickly go through this. I'm gonna just, create a simple console app. I'll just leave the name as console app 5. I'm gonna use the default framework as well, which uses .NET 6. And here is my simple console app. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this app as well. And you can see here, I get hello world at the top, which is pretty cool. It's exactly what I want. And I went ahead and actually ran this without the debugger. So this will just launch my app without the debugger, whereas this option will actually launch my app with the debugger, which we'll get into a bit later on. And so I'm going to go ahead and start writing out a variable called, let's say, file name. And I'm going to set it to equal args. And I want to point out this is IntelliSense. So IntelliSense is a code completion aid. So I get all these different completion options, and you can select it by pressing tab, which is really cool. You can also press Control Space to bring the IntelliSense list back up. And you can see here I have all these different filters for classes, structures, as well as locals and parameters, which is really cool and super helpful. And so notice how also if I press a semicolon here, Visual Studio knows to add that semicolon to the end of my line, which is pretty cool. And for those of you that aren't familiar with args, it is a built-in variable that I can pass to a console app. And so I can also hover over args, and here is quick info, giving me more information about my code. And it's letting me know that args is an array of strings, which is really cool, and it's pretty helpful. So definitely check out quick info. And you also might notice that I get this light bulb over here. This light bulb provides suggestions to help me maintain and modify my code in order to follow best practices when writing C# or Visual Basic code, which is pretty cool. And so here, if I click on the light bulb, or I can use the shortcut Control Dot or Alt Enter, which will also bring up the light bulb, I'm getting a suggestion to use an explicit type instead of var. And so I can go ahead and accept that. This is more of just like a style preference. It's just suggesting that you may as well use this because it does make your code more clear. But something that Visual Studio does have built in, which is really cool, is inline hints. So if I want, I can use Control Q search, where I use this every day. This is where I pretty much search for all of my options. What's really cool is you can also search for different commands. So if I want to run code cleanup, I can just do it from Control Q search. You can also learn about shortcuts here, which is really cool. So I also use that, which is really handy.
Mika, I just wanted to ask, can you zoom in a little bit? Your code size especially is a little bit
Yeah,
small.
for sure. Let me do 180 instead of 150, I guess.
I might even go 200. Just some people watch on pretty small screens.
Yeah, let me do that. Okay, is that better?
That's better.
Okay, cool. So I love using Control Q search just to learn about shortcuts, as well as like if I want, I can run the debugger from here or run tests from here. And I also can search for all the different options that I want to set. So one of the options that I want to view here is inline hints. And so instead of going into, tools, I'll just show you tools, options, and then search for inline hints this way. I could just search for it and it will also just bring up this dialog as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. And voila, notice that I now get this inline type hints, and I know this is a string, which is really cool. And cool, so that's called inline hints, so definitely check it out. We recently added that as well, so it's really cool. So I use this all the time. I actually always have mine on. And if for those of you that actually don't want to have it on, you can also disable it, but you can press the shortcut Alt F1, and that will just bring them up if you click on that. So you can actually peek and view these hints at any given time by pressing down Alt F1. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this. So I like to have this on. And now let's go ahead and read the text. So let's do this, bar text equals, and then here's my IntelliSense completion. That's really handy. And so I'm going to use this API that comes with .NET that's called read all text. I'm actually going to use the async version. And here I also get quick info, again, letting me know about the different overloads, as well as a description of what this read all text async API does. And it's letting me know it asynchronously opens a text file, it reads all the text in the file, and then it closes the file. So that's a really good information to pretty much have there. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass in file name. And I'm going to press semicolon, which will go ahead and add that to the end, which is pretty cool. And so quick info is one way where I can learn more about different APIs in .NET, but I can also use our navigation features. And so many of our navigation features are available in the right-click menu. So I can just right-click here and I can use go to definition. And this actually navigates me to the source code. So if I go ahead and expand this, I get a summary of what this API does, as well as the types of parameters I can pass in and what it will return. So this is like all the source code, which is pretty cool. So Visual Studio now lets you navigate to source. So it's brand new, just came out in the last few releases, which is cool. We also have this, and I feel like a lot of only like many of the Roslyn devs know about this, but I feel like a lot of customers, when I talk to them, they're not aware of this. This is the navigation bar. So with this, I can view all of the different methods that I have here as well, and it'll navigate me. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, you can definitely use that and check that out. Cool. And so I'm going to just go back here, and I actually want to go ahead and make this. Before I do that, I do want to mention one more thing that we added. So we also now have support for the code definition window, which is another way to explore code. So I can actually go to view, let's see, the code definition window. And if I want, let me just expand this a bit. If I want, I can just double click on here. And again, it'll take me to actually see the definition of where this code is being defined and everything. So this was supported in like C++, and it's been in Visual Studio for a while, but we finally just added support for it in C# and Visual Basic. So yeah, so it's really exciting for us. Okay, so back to this demo. So I'm not totally done. I'm using read all text async, but I'm not totally done making this async. So I do want to add await here. So I'm going to do .await, and I get this await in my IntelliSense list, which is awesome. So if I press tab, it'll go ahead and accept that and add the await over here in the right location because we're that smart. And making this async will just pretty much make my code more efficient. Because reading a file doesn't require CPU, and we're saying, hey, CPU, take a break and we'll call you when we're ready to read this file. So that's pretty much what this is doing. And so to prove that this program is actually doing something, let's go ahead and use console.writeLine to print out this text variable. And so I can go ahead and write that out and use IntelliSense and accept that. Or if I want, I can use snippets, which is, so for console.writeLine, you can just write CW and then you press tab twice and it'll go ahead and insert that entire console.writeLine statement for me. So it's pretty cool. We have snippets for properties, for loops, for each loops. So definitely check it out. It's pretty awesome. Saves a lot of time. So cool. So now I think I'm ready to run this app, but I haven't specified the file that I want to read from yet. And so let's create the configuration for that file that we want to read from. So the way you can do that is you can right click on console app and select properties. And this will open the project properties page, which allows me to configure my project. And this project properties page is actually brand new to Visual Studio 2022. It's pretty cool. So definitely check it out. And if I go to debug and I select Open Debug Launch Profiles UI, I can specify the set of things I want my program to do at launch. And so the file that I actually want to pass in will read our own file here, which is pretty meta. But I'm going to go ahead and copy the path for that, and then I'll paste it into these command line arguments because this is what I want, my program to do at launch is read from this path. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on my program.cs file. I'll copy the full path there. Then I'll open my debug launch profiles UI and I'll paste in this path in my command line arguments. Cool. So now I want to see what's going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint. And this time I'm going to launch with the debugger. Okay, cool. So yes, I want to verify this is all working with the debugger, and I know I'm in debug mode because of this red bar over here. This means I'm debugging. And so here, I just want to call out, I have my autos window, and if I go ahead and expand args, I can see right over here that the element's at 0, and the value for that is the path that I just added in, which is really cool. I want to also quickly go over the different debugging controls. So this is stop, so this will end debugging. Then we have restart, which will end debugging and then immediately relaunches debugging. So then I have step out, which is what's normally used for a much more complex program. And then I have step over, which allows you to advance the next available line of code. So I'm currently on line 2, so pressing this will take me to line 4. And then we also have step into, which will dive deeper into the method. So I'm going to go ahead and use step over. And if I go to my autos window, I see that file name is null. And in C#, null means nothing. It has no value because we haven't read the file yet. And here is my locals window. And this shows me all the variables that are in scope. And if I step over again, it will show me that file name is no longer null. It has a value, and I can verify that it's set correctly. So that's pretty cool. And if I step over again, I can see that, that the text, the name, so the value for that is actually, it looks like I see like a comment at the top. So if I want, I can actually expand this text visualizer, and I can see here that this is, this looks exactly like my program.cs file, which is the path that we created to read from, which is really awesome. So yeah, so that was the debugger helping me verify that that my app is reading from a file correctly. Cool. So one thing I do want to also point out, so let's say I want to rename this variable name to, let's say, path, because that's essentially what it is. You might notice here, file name, I'm now getting an error. And quick info is letting me know that the file name does not exist in the current context. So that's really helpful. But I also have this error here. And so if I go ahead and open this, it'll open my error list. So the error list will just show different errors or warnings in your code, as well as suggestions to make your code better. And so here I also have these filters. I can filter them out if I want. And let's say I only want to view errors, and like getting warnings, viewing warnings is too distracting, or viewing suggestions is too distracting. I can always filter those out. And so again, the error is telling me that the file name does not exist in the current context. So I can go ahead and use a code fix for this. And so it's letting the fix that Visual Studio is offering me is to rename this file name to path. And so there you go. So that is just the light bulb also helping me fix errors in my code, which is pretty awesome. Cool. So what else do I have?
Hi, Mika. I'd love to jump in and ask a couple of questions that have been flowing through as you've gone through your awesome presentation so far.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So the first one is kind of taking us back a bit. So can the community version be used to produce software for sale?
I'm not sure what, so can the community version be used to produce software for sale? I mean, I assume so. Yeah, you're free to do whatever you want to do with when writing code, right? So yeah, that's totally fine.
I saw Matt shaking his head, and this is a common question, so I just wanted to jump in. Do you want to go in more detail, Matt?
Yeah. So I can do that. So the community, what's special about the community, the free version, is who can use it. So if you're using it for open source, it's free. If you're like a small team of developers, it's free. Like, you're not allowed to use the free version if you're a big company with a bunch of developers, then you have to pay. But if you're a student, if you're individual, if you're like a small startup with just a few developers, like up to 5 developers or something like that, or if you're doing open source, it's free for you to use. What you do with it, we don't care, right? So you can produce software that you sell, you give away for free or whatever. That's not part of the license. We only care that you don't use it for free if you're a big company that can afford the full product.
Cool.
Makes sense. Thank you to the other experts for jumping in and helping us.
Yeah, thank you.
Well. The next question is, where's the classic main method for console apps?
Yeah, so we actually simplified our templates. And so this is pretty new. So we pretty much just took that away and just made it really simple for you. And so now it's just the console.write line for that.
Awesome. That's great. Chill Crunch is asking, how do you turn on those awesome purple annotations that you did in the beginning? I think you showed it briefly, but can you remind us?
yeah, you can just go to tools, options. Yeah, I can actually show you. So I like to just literally search for it using control Q search. So they're called inline hints, and we have it for both Visual Basic and C Sharp. And so you can go to either tools, options, text editor, C Sharp advanced, and then you just scroll all the way to the bottom, and then you can just click on display inline parameter. We have it for both parameter names and types. And or if you don't want to have them enabled at all times, you can just press down the keyboard shortcut Alt F1 to bring those up whenever you want.
Awesome. Another question. So, what are the important things to pay attention to when debugging non-C# files like XAML or Razor files?
I'm not totally sure exactly. So I pretty much just debug C Sharp, but I think let's see. Oh, often I get errors like not loaded symbols. I'm not sure, but I would advise you to file a bug for that if you are getting that. And yeah, and then we can just take a look and see what's going on exactly.
So just
Or Mads might have more info on
no,
that.
I mean, just to add to that. So if you're debugging something that doesn't have symbols, it's usually because a module hasn't loaded, or it can't find the symbols. So a few things have happened. So first of all, you might have enabled what's called just my code. So if you want to debug just my code, but you're stepping into a DLL that ships SAML files, that's not your code, so it's not going to go in there. So it doesn't load those things. So that could be something to look out for. That setting, just my code, and as Mika showed, just go to search and search for just my code, and it'll take you to the setting where you can enable or disable that. So another one is the debugging through external code, which just came online. Was that a 17.1 feature, Mika? I think it was. So it very recently. We
You mean
allow you.
navigating or navigating?
No, not navigating, the debugging. You can debug into
Oh yeah,
external code
source link.
by,
Yeah.
so if it's from NuGet packages that has source link, you can debug into the source code directly of those external references, which is pretty fantastic, but also into the .NET framework code itself. So
Yeah.
so you'll be able to debug those. But if you're using a NuGet package that does not have source link, then that could be a reason why you're not able to fully debug into that source code. And so you should raise a bug with that NuGet package author or send them a
Author,
pull
yeah.
request. It's a
It's really
very
up to
simple thing
them.
to enable in your NuGet packages. And then finally, if you go to debug and show modules, make sure that the modules are loaded. Sometimes they're not, and you can load them. So the debug modules window might come in handy.
Awesome. Thank you for your very thorough answer to that one. That was very, very helpful. And there's one more thing I'd like to bring up before we move on, Mika. So Philip is concerned about VS 2022 IntelliSense becoming a little bit slow, and he's worried that the new features will make this worse. Any thoughts on that? What has the team thought about with regards to this?
Yeah, I would definitely really encourage you to file a perf issue. We would love to just see what's going on and fix whatever is happening for you. And you can do that by sending feedback, and you can report a problem. And it would be awesome if you can also include a trace or a sample, an example of your solution, just so we can actually repro and follow the exact steps that you're doing and figure out what performance issues you're having with IntelliSense. So yeah, that would really help us. And we really do encourage folks to actually file perf issues through Visual Studio.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Mika. I will step back again and let you continue with your tips for all of us.
All right. Okay, cool. So, okay, another thing that I wanted to point out that I noticed Mads didn't go over because he had a really thorough talk and went over all the latest and greatest VS features. Maybe he did go over this, but I might have missed it for a second, but we do have an integrated developer PowerShell. And so the shortcut for that is Control Backtick, which is the same shortcut used for VS Code, because we're all about that consistency. And so you can go ahead and, do whatever you want in here. Like for instance, you can create an editor config if you want. see. And so it was created, but I will have to go to open this in File Explorer real quick and make sure that this is actually, oh wait, actually I'm going to make sure that this is being shown. So hold on one second. Add existing item. Let me do it this way. Open, add an editor config. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with editor config, it's a single file that helps you maintain consistent code by defining coding conventions. It can live with your code in its repository and use the same source control. That way anyone on your team that's cloning from that repository can use the same coding conventions. And so we recently created a new UI for it. It used to be this text file, and so now we have this awesome new UI that you can use. And so you can pretty much, easily enable or disable different code style conventions. You can set the severity of them. So before, when I got that error for when I did a rename to my variable, that severity is known as an error. But if I want, I can make it you can set severities to be warnings or suggestions. And so this is a brand new UI that's really cool. You can also define different naming styles, white space for how you want to format your code. And then we also have these built-in .NET 6 analyzers that come with the .NET 6 SDK. So this is just a bunch of .NET developers got together and they're like, how do we teach people how to write their best C# code? And so they pretty much created these analyzers, these code analysis rules that pretty much guide you as you're writing code. And then they'll suggest you things through the light bulb, pretty much what I showed you earlier. So that's also something that's definitely worth checking out. And with that, I think that's pretty much all the demos that I had for today. So, but yeah, definitely feel free to ask me any questions as well on Twitter. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mika. I'm quickly looking through to see if we have any other questions here that the people want to know.
So one question that came up was in comparing different Visual Studio versions. Actually, I'll just bring Mads on. We can just kind of do some live questions. One question that came on, and I'll actually just share my screen because there's a question on comparing different Visual Studio versions and what features are available and which. So there's a page here, and I'll throw it in the chat. But this just shows, and like Mads was saying earlier, we really try and give you, like, if you're an individual developer or working on a small team, most of the features that are in Enterprise are features you wouldn't use, like you wouldn't care about, like these mega. So a lot of them are like advanced testing tools or collaboration features, things like that. So we really try and make it so you're not going to be, like, as a small individual developer, stuck on anything. So just wanted to share that out.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, so I think like between community and professional, it's pretty much the same product. Mm-hmm. So if the difference is the things that come around the Visual Studio. So if you have a subscription for Visual Studio Professional, you get stuff like credits for using Azure, which can be really nice when you're doing development. You can like publish things super easily if it's a website, let's say, up to Azure and see it live shared with people and have it run. And it's not going to cost you anything because it's included with the subscription. And there's some stuff for like Pluralsight courses and a bunch of other things. But the product, Visual Studio itself, is pretty identical between community and professional. When we then come up to Enterprise, we're going to see a lot more features that only exist in Visual Studio Enterprise. Code coverage, live unit testing, code mapping, and a bunch of kind of architectural tools and stuff for like solution architects that are like beyond, let's say, like an individual developer. Might find some of this useful, but it's geared to more the big enterprise where you have different roles of people specializing in various different things.
Yeah. I forget. I think I thought I shared my screen. I forget if I actually did. But anyways, this is expandable too, and you can kind of break it down, and you can see like specific, like some of the more advanced testing, more advanced, debugging, diagnostics, and stuff like that. So, yeah, cool. Let me see. There was one other thing that I had forgotten to share, but we also have some more resources, and I'll throw these in the chat as well. But there's only so much we could cover, and so we've got some more kind of links on, like, for instance, Mika showed .NET productivity, and there's a page just on that. There's also this, Mads, you shared with us this tips and tricks link.
Yeah. It's a YouTube playlist with a bunch of videos on, like, it's great. Like, if you're new to Visual Studio, there's a lot of tips and tricks. I actually showed a bunch of them here today, but there's a lot more. Like how to work with JSON, how to get the best experience out of certain things that you may not realize that you can get a better experience with unless you see the video, right? It might not be obvious. And you might not even think that, hey, I don't think I need a better experience for this type of thing. But then when you see it, it's like, oh, I definitely want that. So yeah, that's a good playlist on YouTube with a bunch of like very short videos, 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minute videos.
There was one, I think, in here. Oh, I may not have included it. We also have a more advanced tutorial. I'll add it to the list, but on debugging, and it kind of takes you through with a specific problem in code, and it helps. It has you set breakpoints and kind of go through there.
So we got a question from Walter. Is there any reason to have older releases of Visual Studio left on the machine? Like I showed, I had both Visual Studio 2019 and 2022. Are there risks in or hurting a new installation if Visual Studio, after you uninstall older versions? Yeah, I think in the past there could be some hiccups actually, but we're talking before Visual Studio 2010. No, before Visual Studio 2012. There could be some things there. Nowadays, like when you install, and for the past 8 years, you can have multiple versions of Visual Studio installed at the same time, and they do not interfere with each other. It used to be that they used the same part of the Windows registry to store values, but they don't do that anymore either. So no, they don't pollute. There's no pollution going on. You can uninstall an old version while you have a new version installed, and that's not going to affect that new version. You can have as many installed as you have disk space for, and that does not hurt anything. You can uninstall any of them at any point in time. That does not hurt anything. And that's actually how we do internally, how we build, because usually people have what's, the official release, so they can reproduce bugs if they have to fix them, our engineers and our teams, right? But they also have the nightly builds, and they have the public previews, and they might have not the nightly builds, but sort of the even faster builds than that, to always be on the latest and greatest. So usually our engineers have between like 2 and 4 simultaneously installed versions of Visual Studio with no problem. Oh, and then they might have an older version, again, to reproduce issues, right? Because Visual Studio 2019, for instance, is still under support. So we have to like be able to reproduce and fix bugs that are found there, even though it's not the latest and greatest. So yeah, that's very common, and it absolutely does not hurt anything.
One thing I know we mentioned a couple of times for questions, but reporting a problem in Visual Studio. And I wondered, could one of you actually like share your screen and like kind of walk through reporting a problem? Because that's one of the things that took me far too long to learn about. But it really does help us to get problems solved.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me know when you can see my screen, John.
Yep.
I can see it.
Okay. So, yeah. So up here under the help menu, there's send feedback, and we can report a problem or suggest a feature. The only way we can report a problem is actually from within Visual Studio, like here. Even though it opens a website, we can't go straight to the website. So that's worth keeping in mind, and I'll explain why that is as we go along. I have multiple different accounts, so I'm going to select one. Let me just use this one. This is my Microsoft account. So here, I'm not going to report an issue that I found. So I can give it a title, like, what could that be? Debugger stopped working. I don't know. And then it said, hey, could this be one of these existing ones? and I'm like, yeah, it's no, it's not that one. Is it this one? Oh, that one was fixed. Okay, that's cool. But let's say it's not an existing one. It's a new one. Then I continue on and I start describing what I'm doing. And of course, you want to write like it as detailed as possible, like how to reproduce the issue. And then you can like specify like how does this affect your work? Like, is it more difficult to is it I'm unable to use this new version because of this issue? And so on and so forth. Record. You can record, include screenshots here. I took a screenshot of Visual Studio. I want to include that. Click here. You can even crop it. Say, oh, actually, it's only this part over here that's interesting. Here we go. There we go. And then finally here, additional attachments. Oh, I can record. So I can record the screen here using the Windows Step Recorder. If I click this one. So I can reproduce with like a recording, which is nice. But look at all these files here, and there's actually more. These are log files and stack traces and stuff that are being sent with your issue. So you can just click the submit button, and you're good to go. And all these files are being collected by Visual Studio. And what's really cool about this is we get all this sort of data that might explain what's going on under the hood, and we can use that to more easily reproduce and figure out what the problem is with the code. And that's why we only can create new problem reports by going through the Visual Studio help menu, because because what happens actually is a WebSocket connection between the developer community website that we're looking at right here and your locally running Visual Studio. And so there's communication going on in between to show these files. So these files are actually not being sent over the web like this through the website, so don't worry about that. But it just gives you like an idea of what files are being sent. Visual Studio is in the background and will send all these files. And then we have a server that like matches the problem report up with the log files that come in whenever whenever Visual Studio is done sending them, which can take a while because some of these stack traces can be pretty big. So that's in a nutshell, and it's kind of what it is to send a problem report. You're going to get emails whenever there's any movements, whenever there's an engineer that comments on it. Because what actually happens with this problem report is that it goes into our internal Azure DevOps system, and it's automatically being routed to a product team. So it could be the editor team or the Visual Studio, or it could be Mika's team, right? It could be the .NET tooling team. And they look at this incoming one and say, okay, let's prioritize this and get this fixed. And so there might be a person that answers it that says, yep, we have now triaged it, and we hope to fix it soon, and we put it under investigation or something like that. And so you get emails every time there's a movement, every time there's a comment, so you know what's going on and can stay up to date. And we actually do get a lot. John, do you know how many? We get?
I don't know the number, but it's a significant amount, and it also totals them up. So if multiple people report the same problem, it will merge them together, and we get internally prioritized lists, and we use this. And I'm regularly on these meetings where they present to the higher up executives, and they'll say, here's how we're prioritizing things. And they'll go through and they'll say, okay, we're getting this thing and it's crashing or it's slowing down on, and we're seeing the numbers go up in the latest release. So, it really is. So when I'll see people complain on YouTube or on Twitter or wherever, and I'll say, like, go through and report a problem so it actually gets fixed.
Yeah, exactly. That's like the first step. That's what I always encourage people to do, especially for perf issues. Like, we can't really help that much unless we actually get those logs and traces and really dive deep and understand what's going on. So.
And we want you to vote. So if you find something that you agree with, like a feature request, or you find a problem that you also have, like, upvote it. So here's one. Like, let's say that you really want like Visual Studio for Linux, right? You go in here and open the ticket and then vote for it. Here, give it a vote, okay? The same goes with everything else. And you can actually see how many we fixed. So if you go here, how many were fixed? So here we go. So Visual Studio, this is the official one. This is not preview. This is one that's out now. We can see the total number of bugs that were fixed is like closing in on 800 bugs and feature requests that are reported by the community, by you guys, everyone using Visual Studio. Those are just the issues and the feature requests that you submitted through this website. In one single release, 17.1, so that's the first update to Visual Studio 2022, almost 800 things were in that. So yeah, we get a lot and we fix a lot. So keep them coming.
Awesome. Thank you for taking us through that. Super helpful. I'm looking through the chat.
Let's see. Oh, this is a good question here. So if you submit a problem, do you get notified?
Yes. So when it gets fixed, you'll be notified. If it's a problem and it gets fixed in a preview, it will always go into like a state that's called it's fixed, but it's pending release. So it hasn't been released yet. And that just means that we don't always know exactly what release it's going to go into. So it could be on that. But once we know for sure what release it will be in, and that'll happen within a couple of weeks after it gets fixed at the max, maybe a month, no more than that, maximum. That ticket will be updated saying, hey, it was now released in, like, let's say, Visual Studio 2022 preview 2, or something like that. And then you'll know what it is, and you'll be notified about that. And so you can go download that preview or update Visual Studio to that latest preview version, and you can test it out and help verify that the issue actually is fixed. And if it turns out that it isn't, maybe we thought we fixed it, maybe we thought the change we did would fix it, but it didn't for your particular scenario, you can say, hey, it wasn't fixed, and request that it gets reopened. And people do that. It does happen.
One thing that came up, and Mika was highlighting this too, but when you report a problem about something, about a performance issue, something slow to open, if you're, we really do track that. And when you do report a problem, we see those logs, and we'll actually be able to tell quite a bit more. There's so much more information to this. Took 0.38 milliseconds, and we expected it to be like no time at all, versus a comment saying this is slow, right? So
yeah, because slow is performance is usually is always like perception.
Yeah.
And so what might seem slow for you turns out to be, oh, that's actually lower than the threshold that we have, that we sort of, there's physics involved too. Like if you have to go back and forth between threads, and maybe you're IO bound or disk bound or network bound, like we can't go faster than certain things, and the consequence is this and that, and we can't, like, there's no fix for it without a re-architecting of a larger thing to get around those things. And so, like, okay, that's how a bug report might be. Like, we can't do anything, but we can convert a bug report to a feature request. So the feature request becomes, hey, we want a re-architecture of a certain thing, or like a reimagination of a feature, right? And then, so bugs can turn to feature requests, and feature requests can turn to bugs, depending on sort of the nature of them as they go through the process, and we investigate what's going on. And so,
can you folks talk about what we do as far as how do we track performance? Like, I know, for instance, there were some things about making solutions open faster, and then also making sure, sometimes people install a bunch of extensions, and then maybe it's the extension actually that's slowing things down. So what do we do to make sure people have a good experience performance-wise?
I can start. So we do have something, many people have heard of Windows's Watson service that reports like whenever apps crash and so on. So we get information of that. But Visual Studio also has something called Perf Watson. So we monitor hangs and just different aspects about perf, and that gets reported automatically as well if you've opted into to that telemetry. And so we can follow very, very precisely, like we know that in the 95th percentile of large solutions being opened, we can tell you that we are now faster in Visual Studio 2022 version, that we're faster than a previous version, for instance. And so we can track, like, on the millisecond, like, how are we doing over previous versions, and we know, oh, there's a problem right here. People are complaining about something. We can see that the numbers don't lie. This is what they tell us. And so how do we get that number down? Like, how do we get faster? And there's all these key scenarios. Like typing is one. Like there must not be a delay when you type, right? So that's one key scenario. Solution has to open super fast. That's another one. Visual Studio has to start up fast. That's, and so on and so forth. And yeah, sometimes extensions play a role, but to a lesser extent now than in the past, exactly because of how we are looking at how we can make things faster. We're actually loading extensions now asynchronously after Visual Studio has started up. We used to load extensions synchronously during the startup phase of Visual Studio. So that slowed down things, right? So we're doing these things, re-architecting some of these processes so that we can optimize for those pain points that people have. And it's ridiculous. If you look at, like, take all the versions of Visual Studio, 2010, 2012, 2013, 2015, 2017, 2019, 2022, you see like how the performance just gets better and better and better. And as I said, it's a perception thing. And we look at the 95th percentile, the 50th percentile. You might have a solution that doesn't fit those buckets, and you're like, oh, well, it's actually worse now, or whatever. It's like, that may be true for your particular situation, but we look at the aggregate, and they're like a lot better.
Cool.
We have another question about how the community can contribute to this process even more. Is it possible for them to contribute to the actual code itself, for example?
So for Rosalind, yes, I encourage you to. We have like over 8,000 issues, and we're open source. And so for IntelliSense or code fixes, refactorings, code analysis, all those code analysis tools, you can definitely go to github.com/.net/Rosalind, and you can definitely, go to the README, and you can learn how to contribute. And then Mads, you can talk about contributing to VS.
Yeah. No, that's there's some. So .NET is all like open source pretty much, and so anything that has to do with that, as Mika says, yeah, you can send pull requests. Visual Studio itself is not open source, like the main Visual Studio application, for various different reasons. It's one of the largest apps in the world, and so the purpose of having something open source is that people should be able to clone it to their machine, and then reason about the source code, figure out where the trouble is that they want to fix, and then fix it, and then be able to run the app to see that it was fixed. The complexity of Visual Studio and the sheer size of Visual Studio. I think the source code alone is 6 gigs. And that's just the C# and C++ files. That is like raw source code, 6 gigs. That does not include images, doesn't include any like third-party DLLs or anything like that, right? So but then you can't hit F5 like I was doing in my demo to run the console app. The build process is very complicated. So even if we did open source Visual Studio, no one would actually be able to open it in Visual Studio and run it. And so so the purpose of it being open source kind of dies. It would be fun to look at the code. I agree with that. So having reference code or whatever, that would be a fun thing to look through and comment on. And I'm sure
kind of yes, but
about
kind of no. Like I'm guessing there's a decent amount of scary code that you need.
Yeah.
There's some complex code.
Some
Only
of the code
one person
is
knows how to write it.
Yeah, and some of it is really old, right? There's probably components deep down somewhere in Visual Studio that no one has the source code for. I'm sure, right? Just because of the sheer age of Visual Studio, there's less and less of that code, those dependencies. Like they get flushed out as we move along and modernize and stuff like that. But there's still stuff that's from the 90s, which is really cool. It stands the test of time, which is impressive. But anyway, so all that to say, Visual Studio itself is not open source, but components of it is, like Mika was saying, all the .NET stuff, or a lot of it is. There are other things like there's various different templates. There's some stuff. The library manager for ASP.NET is open source. So, and that's an extension. So if you know how to write extensions, you can actually clone that and run that, fix bugs, and send pull requests back. So there are pockets sort of the newer features that are open source, because we really love open source. We really want to do it, but it has to make sense. And it kind of doesn't make sense in its current form that Visual Studio, the IDE, the 6 gig kind of monstrosity of source is just not in a state where it makes sense.
One other thing, just we were talking about Visual Studio on Windows, like the full. Sometimes we'll call it the full fat Visual Studio, or but VS Code is open source, and that is something too that people can contribute to. So Mika, when you showed the type annotations, do you mind showing that one more time? People love that. Like that was very, very popular. So I think for the third time, if you could show that off.
Yeah, for sure. 1 second. Let me just.
Also mention the keyboard shortcut.
Yeah. Hold on.
I have to say, I've been using Visual Studio since since it was, since the 90s. And
Wow.
I've learned stuff from both of you during this. Like there's just a continual amount of stuff or things I've learned and forgotten. So I really appreciate all these tips.
Yeah, so you can go to inline hints, and I went ahead and enabled them in Tools, Options, Text Editor, C# Advanced. C# Advanced is where all the cool things are. We have a lot of options here. They're not all super advanced, but it's definitely worth checking out to see like what options we pretty much have. And so you can select display inline parameter name and inline type hints, and that will go ahead and turn on these hints for you. And then, but by default, they are off, but you can go ahead and use the shortcut Alt F1. And you have to press those down. And we're actually working on updating that shortcut. We want to use Control. So that will actually toggle them on and off without needing to like press down a keyboard shortcut. So yeah, check it out. You can also, real quick, you can go to fonts and colors, and you can set these to be whatever colors you want. So we actually have an option for this. I think it's under inline hints for this. So that's pretty cool. So here you can actually set the item foreground and the background as well. So you can customize these. So I actually went ahead. I customized mine to be purple.
Do you have a font with ligatures? Because that's also another, that's another tweak thing that you can do. There's some that I know, I think Cascadia has.
Cascadia Code. Cascadia Code.
Yeah.
Not Cascadia Mono, but scroll up a little bit. Take Cascadia Code.
Just this one? Okay.
Yeah. Cascadia Mono is the default one, but if you switch it to code, you get font ligatures.
So like if you do equal greater than, it'll convert that to like a nice little.
Not sure.
Or
do you have yours, Mads, working? Or?
Like a lambda or whatever.
Just do exclamation mark equals.
Okay.
So like, yeah, not equals.
Say, oh wait. Something like that. You're saying,
yeah,
oh, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
So that's some
that
people hate it,
sense,
some people
yeah.
like it. I don't use it when I'm presenting most of the time, but when I'm writing code, it makes me happy. It's just a small little thing, but
it's cool.
Wow. Well, we are getting towards the end of the time. One thing I did want to show for people that were interested in the debugging, you gave a great kind of introduction to debugging. And I feel like one thing that new developers, like they're just used to writing code in a more lightweight editor and they don't understand the power of a debugger. Mm-hmm. So I want to share this real quick. This is a new tutorial we just published, and I'll throw this in the chat. And this takes you through like an actual debugging scenario. And so as an example, here's this exercise, and it actually shows like setting a breakpoint, going through and like understanding the watch window, understanding the locals window. So it really kind of, works through a scenario. So if you're like me and you learn by doing, I recommend taking a look at this to kind of learn some additional tips on debugging that you may not be aware of.
That's a really good point. I think, you won't find any seasoned developer that wouldn't think that that wouldn't agree that debugging is like a superpower. And the better you get at debugging, the better you become at fixing things and people are more productive. And debugging has so many facets, and it's so hard, or not hard, but there's just so many things to know. The good news is that Visual Studio is probably the best debugger that exists, like has that in Visual Studio, better than potentially any other IDE out there. and the features are rich. So like one of the best things you can do if you're new to programming is to follow that tutorial John just shared and get better at debugging. It becomes like a superpower. You'll be able to do things and be more productive than your colleagues if you get there. So
one other thing before I've had way too much coffee this morning. I apologize, but one other thing before I turn it back over to Katie to wrap up is our next Let's Learn .NET is at the end of April, and it's going to be on data. So all the stuff on .NET data. So I'm excited about that one.
Yeah, definitely stay tuned for that. But yeah, I'd like to thank our guests for coming on. I learned a lot. John learned a lot, and he's an expert already. So this has been super great. Thank you for all your amazing questions in the chat. I think that really helped us, round out the edges here as well. And we're looking forward to our next one next month on data as well. And we'll keep learning with .NET.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.